Okay, excellent. I think we'll get started and watch people slowly come into the webinar. So for those of you that have already joined us, thank you very much and welcome to this webinar hosted by the International Coral Reef Initiative, the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network and the Australian Institute of Marine Science on the status of coral reefs of the world 2025, a webinar for data contributors. This is the first webinar of two. So for those of you that may want to listen again, you're more than welcome to join us for the second webinar. So before we move into the interesting part of the webinar, just some small housekeeping for you. Please do remain muted throughout the webinar, especially the first section. And then as we move into the second section of the webinar, which will be an open discussion, please do use the raise hand feature in the reaction section of the toolbar, and then you will be given the floor to ask your question or elicit open discussion. The presentations will be delivered in English, but we are providing you with French and Spanish interpretation, which can be accessed towards the bottom of your screen in the toolbar by clicking the globe symbol, and there you can select either French, Spanish, or listen in English. We recommend using a headset and a microphone if possible. This will also allow for a better interpretation of your comments. And to answer your question, Beatrice, yes, we will be sharing the recording after this webinar as well, and it will also be hosted on the reports webpage on the GCRMN website. We do encourage you to have your videos on throughout the webinar, especially for the discussion, and hopefully you will all have lots of questions and points to raise during the second half of the webinar. So just a very quick overview of the webinar. We'll have some introduction and housekeeping as we're doing now. We'll then have an overview of the International Coral Reef Initiative and moving into an introduction to the GCRMN by Britta. We'll then review the status of the Coral Reefs of the World 2025 process, looking at the timeline, the data integration process, how we saw those data, and also authorship as well. And we'll take a look at where we are with current data that we have collated so far. And then we'll move into an open discussions and Q&A session. And this is really the essence of these webinars, that we wanted to provide a space to ask open questions around the use of the data, around the report, how it's being produced, and importantly, how you as data contributors could be involved. So before we move into the International Coral Reef Initiative overview, I guess some introductions are due. So very quickly, and for those that do not know me, my name is Tom Dallison. I'm the Strategic Advisor to the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, and I'm co-leading the data collation process with the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. So Britta, if I pass over to you for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Britta Schafelke. I'm with the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and I'm also the current coordinator of the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Britta. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Jeremy Vicar. I'm the technical coordinator of the GCRMN, and I'm working mostly on the data integration and data analysis.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you, Britta. Just before I move into my section, if you do have questions throughout the webinar, please do use the chat feature. Myself, Jeremy, and Britta are all monitoring that. And of course, if you have technical issues, please do use the chat feature as well. We have the pleasure of having some technical support as well alongside interpretation. So firstly, for those that aren't aware, it's my job to give you a quick precursor to the International Coral Reef Initiative. And ICRI is a global partnership which is really formed between nations and organizations with a common goal to preserve coral reefs and related ecosystems around the world. ICRI was founded in 1994 by 8 nations at the first CBD COP, so the Convention of Biological Diversity, noting we've just finished or concluded the 16th COP. And ICRI was founded by Australia, France, Japan, Jamaica, the Philippines, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. And this year marks ICRI's 30th anniversary. So I'm pleased to have you all alongside us this year celebrating ICRI's 30th birthday. So from those 8 nations in 1994, ICRI now counts 102 members, which includes 45 countries. And when we look at those countries, they account roughly for 75% of the world's coral reefs. We're currently chaired by the United States of America, represented by the Department of State and NOAA, and we're implementing our 2021 to 2024 plan of action, turning the tide for coral reefs. However, in September of this year, at the occasion of ICRI's 38th General Meeting held in Jeddah, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the ICRI membership welcomed the proposal from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to host ICRI for the next 3 years, so from 2025 through to the end of 2027. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be represented by the General Organization for the Conservation of Coral Reefs and Sea Turtles in the Red Sea, or SHAMS for short. And why am I telling you all this about ICRI? Because the GCRMN is in fact an operational network of ICRI, and the GCRMN was established in 1995, a year after ICRI. But Britta will give you a bit more of an introduction to the GCRMN after me. So when we're looking at those members for ICRI, just to give you an idea of the geographical representation of those ICRI countries, and in orange you can see the founding members, but ICRI also consists of global intergovernmental organizations of multilateral environmental agreements, NGOs, private industry, companies, foundations, but also regional sea and intergovernmental organizations. So really we have not only a large geographical breadth, but also from local all the way up to sort of that government level as well. And ICRI was founded on its call to action and also its ICRI framework to action, which really sets out the 4 cornerstones of ICRI, which is to focus on the management of coral reefs, to build capacity, to support research and monitoring, but also to implement periodical reviews as well to ensure adaptive management and monitoring and evaluation. And all of those and both of those foundational documents are available on ICRI's website, and they really provide the foundation for all of our work. And one of those activities where ICRI really sits and its benefit to coral reefs is really at this science to policy. ICRI supports governments and nations to ensure that coral reefs are integrated at the international, regional and national levels, and ensures that those decisions are supported by robust science as well. And you can see some of the products that we develop to support that process. And importantly, it's where the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network sits, enabling ICRI to facilitate those decisions and processes and supporting nations with coral reef monitoring data and the status and trends of coral reefs. So a very quick introduction to ICRI, but a pleasure to hand over to Britta to give you a quick introduction onto the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. And Britta, you should have control.
Thank you, Tom. And yeah, hello again, everybody. I'll give you a very short overview of what the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network is. And that is because I hope that many of you will be actually contributing your coral reef monitoring data to our next report. And I'd like you to know what it is that you are actually contributing to. So as Tom said, the GCRMN was formed almost 30 years ago as a network of ICRI, and it brings together coral reef scientists, coral reef monitoring practitioners, managers, and other organizations that have an interest in coral reef monitoring data, essentially. And it's what we are doing is quite, I guess, nicely summarized in our vision for 2030. So the GCRMN is established to be a core framework for collaboratively measuring and reporting of coral reef status and trends. And that's exactly what the 2025 report will be about. And we're hoping that the outputs, like the 2025 report of the GCRMN, will motivate successful global action for the long-term sustainability of coral reefs and associated ecosystems for nature and people. So something hopefully that brings us all together. The engine room of the GCRMN are the regional networks, and the map here shows you those 10 regional nodes, as we call them, and they're representing pretty much all of the coral reef bearing countries of the world. And these networks are operating quite differently, quite uniquely to each other, but altogether they make up the network that enables knowledge exchange and the production of these reports. And so the global report is pretty much the flagship product of the GCRMN, and it has been produced 6 times in its 30 years of existence. So the first one in 1998 and the most recent one in 2021. So that's the status of coral reefs of the World 2020 report. And I will show you a few results just in a few minutes. There's also other reports that the GCRMN is producing. So the regional nodes, many of them are producing reports that are a little bit more detailed and go some level down in the resolution of the information. So the picture on the left shows the recently published East Asian Coral Reefs status and trends report. And currently underway is the production of the regional report for the Pacific and for the Caribbean. Both will also come out in next year. And then occasionally topical reports are produced. So these could be, for example, monitoring manuals or also reports from the Global Socioeconomic Monitoring Initiative, also called SOCMON. And the picture on the right is, for example, a SOCMON monitoring manual in Portuguese. So I want to show you a few graphs from the 2020 report, and that is just to give you a flavor of the type of information we are producing from the data we are collecting from the members. And the 2025 report will pretty much be an update of the 2020 report. And the 2020 report was the first quantitative analysis of a global data set. And this was only possible because people like you who are collecting coral reef monitoring data contributed those data to this very, very large analysis. So the global data set spanned from 1979 to 2019, 2 million observations from more than 12,000 sites. And there's a grain of salt in this here. Obviously, we are collecting data that are available. So there are biases, geographic biases, temporal biases. Not every site around the world, not every coral reef site has a long-term monitoring program. Some have very short data sets, some are not monitored at all. So what we are trying to do is bringing together these data in analysis that give very, very highly aggregated temporal trends. So you will see here on the middle picture, the highly aggregated temporal trends for hard coral cover and algal cover, global trends over almost 40 years. And then the left-hand picture then superimpose those trends with one of the main drivers of those trends, which are declining trends over the last decade, and that is the sea surface temperature anomalies, the marine heat waves, and so on. So these are the types of analysis that will be done, and Jeremy will talk much more about it. And I just wanted to point out, just in my last slide, that the report has also provided these high-level temporal trends on a regional basis and also on a sub-regional basis. So you can drill a little bit further into the information because obviously the global trend aggregates so highly that some of the resolution is lost. But the regional trends and the sub-regional trends enable more interpretation of these trends that we are finding at these higher levels. So all of these data, and you can see here that the time series are of various lengths, are aggregated as much as we can, but also we are trying to use as many data sets as we can. And again, Jeremy will talk more about it, and I'm handing over to Tom and Jeremy for talking about the production of that next report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Britta, for that overview of the GCRMN and the previous efforts and the Herculean efforts that were undertaken for the last global assessment of coral reefs. And that segues us very nicely into sort of the main topic of this webinar and the exciting process that is being undertaken at the moment by the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network to provide an update to that 2020 report and the production of the status of coral reefs of the world 2025. So I'm going to provide a very few bits of context, and I'll hand over to Jeremy for the technical matters and around data as well. So the status of coral reefs of the world 2025, I think we can all agree, comes at a very timely point. I think we're all very much aware that this is a critical decade coral reefs, and we're giving this webinar against the backdrop of the unprecedented fourth global bleaching event, and as we're receiving reports of bleaching in the Caribbean and other regions in the world as well. So with this main report and understanding where we need to sort of move forward and what those status and trends are with the world's coral reefs, we really wanted to provide an overview of where we're going and where we currently are. So this report, this next global report, will continue to describe the temporal trend of hard coral, but in difference to the previous report that focused on hard coral and algal cover. In this report, we're hoping to disaggregate algae further into macroalgae, turf algae, and coralline algae, recognizing that those different categories of algae play different functional roles on a coral reef. So important to provide that disaggregated process, and of course that will depend on the available data. We're also hoping to include additional descriptive data such as cyclonic activity, sea surface temperature anomalies, but also human population density as well. And we're also asking for further information around status of protection from where those data have been collected. And as Britta mentioned, we'll aim to sort of provide an update to the 2020 report. So how does that process or timeline look? So we're currently undertaking the data collation, integration, and standardization process, which is being led by myself and Jeremy, who will take over from me in a second. And then we're hoping to move into the data analysis section of the report and also its production in 2025, which will include the modeling of those data, but also the writing and the consultation around the language in the report and how the report is laid out and its content. And then that will move us nicely, hopefully, into 2026, where we can focus on its launch and dissemination. And very roughly, the report will feature multiple sections, but to categorize them for ease, we'll have that global synthesis, and then we'll move into those regional chapters as well, which will mimic that same sort of layout as the 2020 report, and will be supplemented by case studies and boxes. And we're aiming for around about 10 or so different case studies across a breadth of topics that are critically important, from how fish data, for example, can be considered, all the way through to socioeconomics, to the impacts of increasing ocean temperature as well. And we'll also have a summary for policymakers. And I must also say as well that this work we're able to do this work, with the support of the government of Monaco and also the government of Sweden as well. So that's sort of very quickly the timeline and then what we're looking at, but I won't take any more time from Jeremy, the man with all the answers. So Jeremy, I'll hand over to you. If you give me 2 seconds, I will give you control of the screen and it should be all yours.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So of course, the first step of producing a GCRMN report is a data collation. And the data collation process is ongoing. We developed a guide for data contributors, as well as a new data sharing agreement that can be signed with ICRI where required. Importantly, the raw data that data contributors will share with the GCRMN will never be made publicly available, and we will only make available the model temporal trends, and this trend will be published alongside the report. A dedicated web page has been provided on the GCRMN website for the 2025 Global GCRMN Report. And we are working also in close collaboration with the GCRMN regional coordinators and data contributors. Just need to change the slide. Okay, I think it works. And for working with the regional coordinators, the previous approach, the one used in the 2020 GCRMN report, was that the contributors have sent their data to the GCRMN node coordinator, and then the node coordinator sent all the data collected inside the node to the GCRMN global team for their integration and their analysis. For the 2025 GCRMN report, we are using a more flexible approach, we are trying to reinvigorate the role of the node coordinators, but making it possible, depending on the strength of the node, between something where the contributors can share their data directly with the GCRMN global team, and for some other region where the contributors share their data with the node coordinators that then share the data collected to the GCRMN global team, such as the 2020 GCRMN report. So the idea is to have something very flexible to make it possible to take into account differences between regions in terms of network strength. Then why data integration is necessary? So at this stage, let's say that we have collated all the data sets across the world, at least many of them. However, as you know, coral reef monitoring data are heterogeneous, both in terms of formats, units, sometimes even languages. So to be able to run a data analysis to produce some model temporal trends of hard coral cover, macroalgae cover, and so on, it's necessary to create, to build synthetic datasets resulting from the integration, from the combination of all individual datasets that have been collected within the world. And this process is named data integration. So we developed for this purpose a process for data integration, a workflow. This workflow has been published in a scientific article. And this workflow comprised 5 main steps that are presented here on this graph. The first step is the data standardization, where we can standardize all individual datasets to the same format. For example, changing the variable names, changing the structure of the datasets, sometimes changing also the units that are used. For example, shifting from feet to meters for the depth. Then once the format and the structure of all individual datasets have been standardized, it's possible to group all these datasets together. This is the second step. Then there is a first step of taxonomic recategorization, which is necessary because usually people in charge of monitoring programs are using different levels of taxonomic resolution. Some of them are using the species level, and others are using the broad categories for example, hard coral, macroalgae, turf algae, and so on. However, you will always find differences in terms of categories used. For example, some people are using Acropora, some others are using Acroporidae, and so on. So it's necessary for us to re-standardize the taxonomy. And this step is also necessary to, for example, correct misspelling errors that have been made on the taxonomic levels. Then there is a fourth step of spatial distribution, where we can assign the GCRMN region, the country, and the territory to each monitoring site. And finally, there is a step of quality checks, where we control the data quality and where we remove the incorrect data, incorrect observations. These quality checks are for example, for controlling if the total percentage cover inside a sampling unit, for example, inside a transect or a photocradua, is between 0 and 100%, because of course, it's not possible to have percentage cover greater than 100%. And this type of quality checks is very important to be sure that the analysis that will be conducted further will provide robust estimates of temporal trends in terms of hard coral cover, macroalgae, and so on. So for the data integration step, we developed a GitHub repository. GitHub is an online developer platform dedicated to collaborative work and to versioning. And all the code that we have produced to standardize the monitoring data that have been shared with the GCRMN core team by the data contributors, all those codes are in open access on the GCRMN DB Bentos GitHub repository. You will find the link here. So everything is transparent and partially reproducible, partially because, of course, your data are not on this GitHub repository. This GitHub repository is only here to provide the codes that have been used to standardize the data, not to provide your data, because the data, your raw data, will always be remained your property and will not be shared by the GCRMN. Interestingly, you will find also on this GitHub repository the list of all individual datasets that have been integrated within this large synthetic dataset created by the GCRMN. And this list, for example, is provided here on this image. And you can see that for some of the datasets in the column rights holder, there are some text in blue. And when the text is blue, this means that you have an hyperlink associated to the name of your dataset. So it's possible for everyone to click on this link and to go back to the website, for example, of the organism in charge of the data, which is the owner of the data. And for some of them, you can also directly download the data if the data are in open access on these raw data sources. Of course, the GCRMN data collation team is taking charge of data integration process, so it's not necessary for you to spend time on standardizing your data, to provide, for example, your data following a template. It's not necessary for you to do this because we are taking charge of the data standardization and integration for you. Then I would like to go back to the data collection process a little bit more. So usually this process is done in four steps. The first step is that we send email to potential data contributors with data sharing agreement and the guide to data contributors. Then if the data contributors are interested to collaborate for the GCRMN report, they send their dataset to the GCRMN data collection team with the signed DSA, and the GCRMN data collection team will then standardize the dataset that has been provided by the contributor. We will assign a unique dataset ID to this dataset, and we will fill the data sharing agreement by signing it. And then the final step is that we are going back to the contributor with the name of its dataset within the GCRMN DB Bartos, the ID of the dataset, and the signed data sharing agreement. In terms of data storage, the data are stored by the International Coral Reef Initiative on a Google Drive folder with restricted access. And the data, once again, will never be made publicly available or shared with anyone else without your agreement. And the access to the synthetic dataset that will be created following the data integration is only for people in charge of the analysis. So basically only Tom, myself, and Murilgan will have access to this synthetic dataset. And at the end, the model temporal trends resulting from the analysis will be published. And finally, I would like to say some words about the authorship, because we decided to change a little bit the authorship approach compared to the previous 2020 GCRMN report. We decided to move to the modified version of the credit approach. Credit is for contributor roles taxonomy. This approach is largely used in the scientific publication, and the idea is to have at the end of the GCRMN report some rows with the name of the contributors, and in column the different actions and the different roles that the data contributor or the author has played in the production of the report. For example, you will find in these columns here, the first column will be about the very beginning of the report, and the last column will be about the end of the report. So basically, you start by funding acquisition, by trying to understand what type of variable you need to produce in terms of indicators and so on. And at the end, you can communicate the report, create the layout, and so on. So for example, if you are interested to collaborate with the GCRMN, if you have data, you can share your data, and then you will be acknowledged for the data acquisition action, data acquisition step. But if you are also interested to collaborate in terms of, for example, writing or reviewing the content of the report, you will be invited to do so. And if you actually collaborate in writing or reviewing, these actions will be also acknowledged within the report. So at the end, we are taking into account the different contribution that you will make on the report. and not only the data acquisition or not only the writing of some of the sections.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Let me just skip back a few slides. Perfect. So hopefully that gives you a quick sort of introduction to the process that's being undertaken, and sort of how your data are handled and stored, and also the benefits of contributing your data and the transparency mechanisms that we've put in place. But please do remember to note down your questions, as we'll be having a session after these next presentations to really delve into that process in a little bit more detail and really discuss your detail. So Jeremy's provided an overview of the process and what happens to your data, but we're not starting this process. We've been undertaking this process for quite a while now. So it's my job to give you a quick introduction to sort of where we are with the data that have been collated. So we have a couple of figures here, and this I personally I think is quite a powerful figure. So we can see that the bar charts across all the GCRMN regions, but also globally, and those the blue lines signify the amount or quantity of data that we've collated so far, and the black line in the middle indicates the amount of data for each region or globally that we had for the 2020 report. So any region where the blue bar extends beyond the black line is that we have more data than we did for 2020 report, and anything to the left of the black line where we have less data or what we could possibly consider a data gap. So we can see for Australia, Brazil, the Caribbean, Pacific, the Arabian Gulf, and generally globally, we have more data than we did for the 2020 report, which is excellent. However, we do still have some areas where we could do some more data, or we have those data gaps. And that's not to say that these data don't exist. It's and especially with South Asia region, the West Indian Ocean, Eastern Tropical Pacific, we're working with those regional coordinators to on the mechanisms to share those data with the global team. And we can look at those data or those sort of gaps or that spatial distribution of data on a map. So again, we can see that where we have those black dots there, it's data from the 2025 report, and where we have regions of blue, that's where we're sort of looking at those spatial gaps in data. But we wanted to be able to provide a more concurrent and continuous update to those data. So Jeremy actually created an interactive map that demonstrates not only the spatial distribution, but also the temporal distribution of the data that we have currently collated. And this interactive map is accessible via the GCRMN DB Benthos GitHub that Jeremy referenced earlier, and I'll provide a link and QR code for you further on. So here on this interactive map, we can see the spatial distribution of all the monitoring data that we have, but in the bottom left hand corner, you can see the key there that signifies the temporal status of those data sets. So where we have purple or sort of bluish looking dots, we have upwards of 10 years worth of temporal data, and those that are more yellow orange are on the lower end of that temporal scale. So if we take a deep dive into the Wakatobi National Park in Indonesia, we can see that as we zoom in, we can actually get into quite a finite spatial scale and see where those data are distributed. And this is very important, because not only does it allow people to understand what data have been contributed, but if you know you have data or know of colleagues or organizations that have undertaken specific monitoring in certain locations, you can go onto the interactive map, you can zoom into that location, and you can understand if those data have been contributed as well. And you can also supplement that with the table that Jeremy showed you on the GitHub. So I really urge you to scan the QR code. I'm going to talk for a little bit longer to give you a chance to get your phones out and scan the QR code. I'll also share the URL in the chat at some point as well. But I really encourage you to go onto that interactive map and have a look and see what data have been contributed and where there may be potential gaps as well. And as emphasized by Britta and emphasized by Jeremy, the more data we have, the more robust sort of our analysis in the report can be. So we really hope that you'll be able to delve in and let us know about any existing data that have not yet been contributed. So before we sort of wrap up this this overview of GCRMN and the Sage Coral Reefs of the world, I'm just going to pass back to Jeremy to give you a quick idea of the sort of statistical work that we'll be doing. And this is definitely well out of my comfort zone. So Jeremy, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So I spoke about the data integration process and the fact that we aim to create a synthetic data set with as much as monitoring sites on Baltic cover as possible at the global scale. And then the second major step, of course, is the data analysis itself. And for now, we are still considering two different modeling approaches to estimate the temporal trends in percentage cover of major Baltic categories, such as hard coral cover. The first approach is the hierarchical Bayesian model. This approach has been used for the last GCRMN report. And the second approach is a machine learning model. This approach is interesting for several reasons. Mainly because it makes it possible to include predictors, that is to say, additional data, for example, sea surface temperature for the sites, intensity of cyclones, and so on. And the hypothesis in that is that the predictors can provide information about the temporal trends for sites where we do not have coral reef monitoring data. So for example, if at the global scale, you have some areas where you have a very limited number of monitoring sites, both in space and time, having the information for the predictors and the information also of the model which has been trained for over monitoring sites, it's possible for the model to give you an idea of the temporal trends for this area with very limited amount of data from monitoring sites. So it's also an interesting approach, but there are several limitations. So we are still considering both approach, and further work will be done early next year to compare this modeling approach and choose the most appropriate based on several criteria. But of course, the materials and method draft section of the report will be shared with all co-authors for review. Along preliminary results, we know that for the previous reports, this is something that has not been done. So now our goal is to provide to all contributors and all collaborators the materials and methods alongside the preliminary results, so people can better understand how the preliminary results have been produced.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And certainly excited for next year to look at the outputs of those analysis and see sort of where we are with those temporal trends and sort of the status of coral reefs. But as Jeremy mentioned, the various approaches are still under discussion, but we hope to be able to provide updates fairly soon. So this is my final slide really before we move into the discussion part of this webinar. And many of this information you'll already know, but I think it's incredibly important just to re-emphasize it, that we are really at a pivotal moment for coral reefs, or a juncture for coral reefs, and the next sort of, well, we used to say the next decade would set the course for coral reefs, but we're halfway through that decade and we're still sort of at the same pivotal moment. So the next 5-6 years are really critical for coral reefs, and this is why this global report and the GCRMN and all of you on the call that are committed to coral reefs are so important, because we need to ensure that those that are making the decisions, those in the international agenda at the regional level and also the national level, are equipped with the necessary resources and information and knowledge to be able to effectively protect coral reefs. And the GCRMN and these global reports and the regional reports really do provide a critical mechanism for nations to implement their international targets. So, for example, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was agreed at COP15 of the Convention of Biological Diversity, but also at the national level through national strategies, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or MBSAPs. You know, the standard cliche is, you know, we can't protect what we don't know is there, and the GCRMN fills an important gap in understanding where our reefs are, and importantly what status they are at. So the 2025 report will really be this stock take at the midway or just after midway point of this critical decade for coral reefs. And for those of you that have read or reviewed the 2020 report, you may recall the hard coral cover figure that Britta showed earlier, and you may notice that slight uptick towards the end. We're not too sure what that uptick is at the moment, but I always like to use it as an analogy that, you know, this report will hopefully tell us, you know, have we turned a corner? Are we seeing the recoveries in coral reefs? Have we plateaued, or have we continued on a downward trajectory? And I guess which arrow color you choose depends if you're optimistic or pessimistic, but I'll leave that up to you. So that's all from us, and thank you for your patience whilst we spoke to you for about 40 minutes straight. But now we really want to give the floor over to all of you to ask questions, to quiz myself, Britta, or Jeremy on the intricacies of this report on the GCRMN. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat. I think they were directed directly at me, so I may read them out if we don't have any takers from the floor. But if there is anybody with a question, please do raise your hand, and I'll give you the floor to unmute yourself. And for those that do wish to speak, please do try and speak fairly clearly at a good speed, just noting that we do have the interpreters online as well. So if anybody would like to raise their hand and take the floor, please do so now. Rita, this one.
Hi, Tom, Britta, Jeremy. Thank you so much for your presentations. Amazing as usual. I have just a quick question. Until when can we send you data? Until when is the deadline? No one wants to answer.
Well,
I'm looking at Jeremy.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Rita, for this question. So in theory, the deadline is at the end of the year, but we know that for some region, for several reasons, this will be difficult. So we will probably postpone the deadline to end of February, but not after, because we have to move forward then for the analysis. And if we delay too much the data acquisition, data collation, and data integration process, then this will delay the entire report production. So no later than February, and if possible, very, very possible, please, the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. And yeah, if I could just add as well, and if there's anybody that has data but is concerned about the timelines that we have, please do just reach out to us. We're more than happy to work with you and support you. We don't want you assuming that you can't submit because you don't have the resources. You know, we're here to help as well. So please do just let us know and reach out to myself or Jeremy or Britta. Do we have any other questions from anybody?
Oh.
Shelley?
Hi, aloha. Yes. Hi, aloha. This is Shelley from Hawaii, from Moku'okeawe. And thank you so much for having this data collection, because like you say, it's a very critical time for coral reefs. And in particular, here in Hawaii, I'm sure you've heard of of the coral preserve that we have in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Papahanaumoku. And you were mentioning that there is data collection for the East Pacific and region, and I'm looking at I know it's in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and looking at what region that would be for the data collection. And we do have NOAA, National Oceanic Administration here, Atmospheric Administration here, that is actively, working on saving the coral and the fisheries and whatnot. But the question is concerning the International Seabed Authority and the deep seabed mining. And so the data that was already collected, and they were looking into this issue, was by Pierre Flamant and John Seibert. And so what they had stated when I was, working with them on issues about ocean mining, was that they stated that sediments, falsely angulated sediments, would reach the Hawaiian Island west-facing shores within 6 to 9 months once the ESA deep sea mining, if it were to actually start up, and that it would move up the Hawaiian Island chains into the coral reserve. And there was this issue that the sediment being falsely angulated would cause, gill impaction, it would cause smothering and entombment, especially of the coral and the benthic species. And then that in case number 17, there was the issue that it was called responsibilities of states mining in the area. So the area is about 2,000 something miles going from Baja California to southeast of what they call Mokokeawe, or the island of Hawaii. So the issue there was that in case number 17, that they stated two things, and this is out of Hamburg, Germany, Seabed Disputes Chamber. So in a science and technology report that I submitted working with Patsy Mink and State Department and others, the outcome was not satisfactory. And what it was, they stated, it was good to know, but it was not satisfactory. Number one, that that there would be processing at sea. And number two was that ESA, the International Seabed Authority, it just stated that they would not be responsible for the matters mined once it left the area. So the problem, and this is my question on, the data collection, is that in the environmental guidelines, it talks about these benthic storms. And if you look at how the hurricanes, they track across the Pacific Ocean and, kind of track their way over here through the Clipperton and Clarion fracture area. And then that's also where the whales come and migratory pelagic species. So if they were to deposit these toxic waste into the Clipperton and Clarion fracture on the benthic seafloor, we don't really have any data on benthic storms. We know it exists, but we really don't know, seasonally, now, I'm thinking, scientifically here, okay, I would assume, which you really don't want to do, but it may lead to research and data, but what happens during the hurricane season and what is going on the seafloor so far as these benthic storms. So, and the other thing is monitoring the turbidity, excuse me, water turbidity from the sediment, from any resuspension of tailings and sediment coming in. Now the currents, like Pierre Flamant and John Seibert said, was, it would, once mining started up, it would be reaching the Hawaiian Islands. So the issue was, I was taking marine science and international law and model UN. So in the excuse me, well, yeah, basically there's, this cooperation that we have with the law of the sea. So as you may be familiar, the United States of America, we're not signed on, but we are observer status. And that the indigenous sector has now stepped into the International Seabed Authority and, brought actually in the Kumulipo, the creation chant, that the Hawaiians and Polynesians and whatnot, it actually starts with a coral polyp. And there's scientific links to this. And then there was other data that showed that and it correlated with the Kumulipo, that land species, like say, especially like the plant waxes, would go, get into the watershed cycle and eventually end up in the ocean. And that these would be distributed and were found even like the Marianas Trench, but it was being, taken up. There was uptake by benthic species of these plant waxes, so that if something happened to the species on land, you would see a problem with the species in the ocean. And before that, there was never really a consideration of, okay, there is this connection. It goes back a very long time. And the other thing was that what is the actual role of the manganese nodules? So, in nature, if these have been here for 80 million years, now sometimes when you cut these manganese nodules open, you'll find these prehistoric shark tooth. And apparently what they're looking at, what was happening was, this particular type of bacteria, and there's this action causing it to draw metals out of the ocean. So I'm looking at it saying, I believe that their function is to maintain the critical ionic balance of the ocean. And so I was putting it to different scientists, like, can we please collect data? Can we please look at this? Because they're basically looking at the profit margin without looking at, not only the permanent damage of benthic layers, it's major issues with sustainable fisheries and whatnot. And of course, our pelagic nursery cycle, where they want to mine down on the flanks of the seamounts that are, critical to, say like well, they call it ahi here, but the tuna, yellowfin tuna and whatnot, so they spawn, they circulate around the seamounts, come back out. It's like this, and the population goes out all over the world because it's all connected. So the other thing that came out recently was that they found that during the night that these manganese nodules are doing some sort of chemosynthesis process and creating what they have called dark oxygen. So there's a recent report that just came out about that. They said it was historic and, they didn't know this before. So I was like, yay, they got something of that coming in. But the problem is like you said, what we don't know. And there's a lot of what we don't know. And we don't want them coming in and doing this mining and like Professor Craig Smith, who was, given a grant, real good fellow, went out and did a environmental study, and he pulled up, there was like over 1,000 species that have never been seen before. And the other issue that is very important is at the National Institute of Health, which has scientists from all over the world, and that Dr. Nasser and scientists from Japan and other places have found that coral in particular stop the replication of of viruses like the AIDS virus. And
Yep.
so you have so
Yes.
yeah, my question is to look at things that we don't know, protecting, to have a precautionary principle. And how can we apply cumulative impacts? Because they're not really saying how much, how they're going to process, what chemicals they're going to use,
Mhm.
what's the
Yeah. I think so. This is interesting, and I didn't thought about such problem before. But maybe we can consider to include within the report some sort of emerging threats to coral reef or possible threats to coral reef in the future. And probably mining could be one of these threats in the future. We also intend to use the sediments and the turbidity within the predictors if we use the machine learning model. So this could also be one of the approach to estimate the impact of mining on coral reef indirectly, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I think just to emphasize the point and just take Shelley's point a bit broader as well, I think it really emphasizes the need for monitoring, not only in the context of of emerging industries such as mining, but of current industries that's happening, and why we need to not only monitor coral reefs post and pre sort of activity and disaster, but also to establish mechanisms to share those data on a national, regional, and hopefully global level as well, so we can understand the full effects. Britta, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything or if you wanted to sort of move on to the next question, but over to you.
Yeah, I think we can move on, but just briefly for Shelley, that we are looking at collating data that are already in existence and analyzing them at a high level for these global and regional trends. So the data itself may offer some information that will be useful for local impact assessments, but that's not what the GCRMN is doing. So there might be data providers in the areas that you are interested in and that's relevant, and they might be contributing data for impact assessments, but that's not something that the GCRMN is doing for this global report. So just to clarify that. But yeah, thank you for that perspective around seabed mining and potential threats to coral reefs. But I think let's move on to, there's a number of
sorry, Britta.
Written questions.
Sorry, Britta, if I may just add one thing, like it's to mention, because it was mentioned at the beginning of the question. We are working very closely with NOAA, because NOAA is currently the co-chair of the International Coral Reef Initiative, but also the co-chair of the steering committee of the GCRMN. So we are working very closely with NOAA. Thank you.
Yes, and we already have included the National Coral Reef Monitoring Program data from NOAA, so this has been done.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeremy, Britta, and Francis. And for those not aware, Francis is the global coordinator of the International Coral Reef Initiative as well, who's joining us on this call. Perfect. So, Britta, I think that's where you were going to, but we've received quite a few written questions in the chat. So if anybody's written a question in the chat and would like to unmute yourselves, then feel free, or alternatively, I'm more than happy to read some of these questions out. If I give a second if anybody wants to take the floor. No? Okay, perfect. So I'll start from as they came in. So we have a question from Michael that says, our data sets are complete through to 2023 and have been acquired by the GCRMN as they're publicly available. When the 24 data sets are complete in February and March, will the GCRMN be interested in them, or will that be too late? Jeremy, I see you replied, but maybe you just want to repeat your reply for the benefit of everybody on the call.
Yes, so we told you that the best approach is to keep in mind that the end of the year will be the theoretical deadline for data submission, but we can potentially postpone to end of February next year. But in the case where you will be able to share data from this year, but next year after the end of February, maybe we can see it case by case with you. So don't hesitate to send us some emails to know if it's too late or not to submit your data, and we will see if it's still possible or not.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And Michael, hopefully that answers your question. We have a question from Lynn from Delta Electronics Foundation, joining us from Taiwan. And Lynn's question actually poses some additional food for thought that Jeremy, you may want to sort of alleviate on as well. So Lynn states that we started coral restoration a few years ago and are starting thinking about monitoring. It'd be great, Jeremy, if we could provide a bit more information on what data should be submitted if you wanted to make a contribution?
Yes, so the goal of the GCRMN is to provide estimates about the temporal trends of, I would say, natural coral reef. So it doesn't exist really natural coral reef anymore, or very partially. But the idea is not to use coral reef restoration data because they are biased in some way. So we would like to focus on monitoring that has been conducted on natural sites that to in other words, sites that are not from coral reef restoration actions. But we consider to include some case study or some box about coral reef restoration within the report. So maybe your data can be useful at some point, but we are not sure yet about the structure of this case study.
And maybe to add something briefly for Lynn, Lynn, usually monitoring for restoration includes reference sites. That's kind of often a design that people use. So if you have already data for reference sites, so sites which are not coral restoration sites, they definitely, if they have the right indicators that we are collecting, so the coral hard coral cover or cover of macroalgae, coralline algae or turf algae would definitely be useful. But it sounds like you are just starting out to think about monitoring.
Hello.
Yes, Lynn, feel free to take the floor.
Hi, Zena. Thank you very much for answering my question. Yes, we just started thinking about monitoring and just start to like scale up our core restoration. And thank you for your advice. And I will like keep an eye on your website and see if there is something like we can do, like data we can share. I will contact you.
Thanks, Lynn. And there will be information kind of coming up also about coral restoration over time, because ICRI is also representing that area of coral reef management. So there's new information coming up all the time.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. And yes, just to add to Britta's point, Lynn, I was just about to state that Delta Electronics Foundation are part of the ICRI Ad Hoc Committee on Reef Restoration and Adaptation. So you have that nice input there into sort of the more technical elements of reef restoration. But feel free to reach out to either of us, or any of us, I should say, with further questions around sort of monitoring that you may have moving forward. More than happy to help. Perfect. So again, if anybody wants to raise the hand, save me reading out questions, then please feel free. But we do have some more questions in the chat. So from Karan from India proposed a couple of questions. So first one being, is there a minimum temporal range in the data required to contribute? And will you also be able to integrate photo quadrat data into the larger data sets, or does it have to be collected in a particular method? Jeremy, I think that's more for you, but Britta, feel free to jump in if you wish.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for reading the question. So regarding the minimum temporal range in data, so that's right. We are talking about monitoring, and in the definition of monitoring, in theory, monitoring means that you are going back on the site several times over the time to get new data on the site. But we are still able to integrate also data from one shot, so only one point in time on one site. This is possible. We are trying to not doing that for small dataset because it's still a lot of work to do. For example, if you only have 3 sites, we'll probably not accept to integrate your dataset unless waiting in the future for you to have more sites. But if you have something like I would say 10 or more sites, it's something interesting, even if you have only one point in time. And regarding the second question, we can integrate data that are in percentage cover of the bentos. So it's possible for us to integrate data from photo quadra, from line intercept transect, point intercept transect, video transect, chain method, and so on. So it's still flexible for us to include data from different methods.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And Karen, I hope that answers your question, but feel free to follow up in the chat, or of course, more than welcome to raise your hand as well. Okay, excellent. Swale, you've asked the question. Are you going to take the floor, or or am I going to read your question out for you, Swale?
Yeah, it's okay, Tom. I can take the floor. Yeah, maybe before I go to my question, just to build on what Karen has mentioned and the response from Jeremy. So will it mean, maybe to understand Karen's question, will it mean that at the temporal range, considering you're building the 2025 report from the 2020 report, so does it mean even the data before the 2019, are you still going to use it, or are you focusing only after the 2019 report? Just to add clarification on that. And then on
Sorry, Swale, I'm not sure if it's just me, but it's quite difficult to hear you. I don't think your audio is great. I'm just looking at Jeremy and Britta to see if it's just me or not. But
am I clear now? Sorry, I have to switch off my phone.
Yeah, try that.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Just building on Karen's question in terms of the temporal range. So does it mean that the range, any range, are you accepting, or is it specifically after 2019? Because we already have the temporal range from the 2020 report. Just to add to Karen's question, and then
yes.
Okay, maybe.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for your question. Maybe I can start by replying to this question and then go back to your second question. So yes, very interesting question. So the idea is to repeat the process that we have done for the last 2020 report. So ideally, we would like to get the data also that have been shared for the previous report. We will not reuse the data that have been previously shared, so for the production of the last 2020 report, because we have signed data sharing agreements, and within this data sharing agreement that has been signed for the 2020 report, one of the conditions was that the data can only be used for the production of the 2020 report. So we have to go back to all the contributors to be sure that they are happy to contribute their data for the 2025 report. That's why we are going back from scratch on this process, and we are looking for all data, not only data between 2020 and 2024.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, for the question. Then, okay, my question is on. Okay, this is the question which I've received from different data contributors in the Western Indian Ocean, whereby some have already used the platform like Mermaid, and they've put their data as an open access there, and they just refer you to Mermaid. So I'm assuming that those people, they may not need to sign the DSA because they've already put their data as open source, but just to get clarification on that. And also because maybe in terms of the data collection, we'll have to reach to those data owners which their data is open, so they'll be able to be acknowledged. So I'm just asking for clarification from your side.
Yes, thank you for this question. Very interesting question, because Mermaid is something like a new tool in Coral Reef monitoring data management. So for those of you that are not aware of what Mermaid are doing, Mermaid is a platform dedicated to people who are going on the field, acquiring data, and using Mermaid, they can put their data directly on the platform. You don't have to use Excel spreadsheet and so on. So you can just put your data on this platform. And for you, it makes it possible to better manage your data because they are online. So you don't have to deal with hard drive and so on. And it's also easier for data contributors to share their data and to make their data openly in open access. So it's very interesting for a more transparent science also, and better collaboration. But for the GCRMN, it means that we have to go back to the people who would like to share their data via Mermaid, because we are not only interested in the data of our collaborators, but also by their expertise and their knowledge on the field. This is very important for us because data are good, but if you are not able to understand the biases associated to their acquisition, you only have one part of the story. So we would like to have also the people in the loop for reviewing the content of the report. And that's why we would like to contact directly people who have data on Mermaid to be sure that they are involved in the process. It's not always mandatory to sign a data sharing agreement. So if people are agree to share their data in open access, we just have to make sure that we have their name. By we, I mean Tom, Britta, and me. So we can acknowledge their work within the report and contact them for the reviewing process at some point.
Excellent, thank you. So I've replied with a thumbs up, which I think means you've answered it perfectly, Jeremy. And I think something that you said there, Jeremy, Swallow, thank you very much for your questions. I think it's just highlighted something that is important, I think, to reinforce regarding the data sharing agreements, and they can be signed if you wish for them to be signed. You don't need to sign one if your data are have less restrictions or, of course, open access. But we also appreciate that institutions, organizations, or sort of ministries or national programs have different requirements around their data. So we're more than happy to also work with you on any specific terms with respect to the use of your data as well. Again, Jeremy mentioned it, but we are flexible in this process and available to support you as well. So if you haven't done so already, please do look at the data sharing agreement and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And again, we're more than happy to work with you on that front as well to support your data contribution. We do have a couple more questions that have appeared in the chat. So we have a question from Tito from Coral Reefs Institute, who's asked that as we currently have people within the field collecting data on the post-heatwave mortality and coral recovery, because the heatwave hit Brazil a little bit later in 2024, they still need time to collect these data and analyze all the images to produce the raw data. I think Tito is just asking for clarification, Jeremy, on what you said earlier about sort of submitting those data a bit earlier into 2025 rather than late 2024. But maybe you also want to touch on if the whole data set needs to be shared at the same time, or if they can be contributed individually. But
it's possible to share a first batch of your data now. For example, if you have data until 2023, and then when your data set has been updated because you are going back on the field to acquire new data, it's possible for you to send us a second batch of your data set, so we are able to include it. But I just would like to add something about the data analysis. Usually we have less data, much more less data for the earliest years. For example, for 2024, we will have very few data compared to 10 years ago in terms of monitoring data. So the trends will be less reliable than 10 years ago, because of course people need time to analyze their photo quadrats and so on. So that's why we also need to include text within the report to explain that some events may have arisen in the recent years that are not captured by the trends in the report. So that's important.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And Tito, hopefully that answers your question. But again, feel free to follow up in the chat or raise your hand. And I actually noticed a question that came in very early. And Tiago, if you're still online, I apologize for not seeing your question right at the start. It was a direct message to me. But I wonder, Jeremy or Britta, if we can just provide maybe a bit more information on the reason for disaggregating algae in comparison to the 2020 report. And if we have any definitions around what we're considering as turf algae, what we're considering as coralline algae and macroalgae. For example, I may have thrown you in the deep end there. I apologise, but any responses I think would be valuable to everybody on the call.
I might start from the ecology and then hand over to Jeremy what the exact definitions will be for the report. So the different groups of algae obviously play very different ecological roles in a coral reef. And so last time they were lumped because in many monitoring programs, they are lumped because people might be predominantly interested in corals. And so they just lump all the algae together into one category. But more and more monitoring programs actually disaggregate them. And for example, coralline algae, crustose coralline algae are a very important settlement substratum for corals. So they play very different roles, whereas turf algae may or may not be a coral settlement substratum. So they are very kind of important to disaggregate from macroalgae, which are the higher, more fleshy types of algae on the reef. And on many reefs are actually a sign that there's, for example, higher nutrient availability, or coral has died and the reef has actually been taken over by some of those macroalgae. So that's why if we are able to, we want to disaggregate them to get more information about the status of the reefs, whether there was a, for example, phase shift from coral dominance to algal dominance, or whether there has just been events that caused coral mortality, but coralline algae are still very prevalent. So the chances that this reef is recovering is very good. So all of that can be potentially gleaned by having these data disaggregated. But I hand over to Jeremy what the exact definitions are, because in most monitoring programs, there is always a little bit of discussion, especially around turf algae. When are we calling it macroalgae? When are we still calling it turf algae, for example? So I know that from our work at Ames, we're always discussing that.
Thank you, Britta. And yes, this is, as you said, it's very important from an ecological point of view to disaggregate the subcategories of algae. But for the GCRMN and in terms of data analysis, and particularly in terms of data integration, it's challenging because different monitoring programs are using different definitions, usually of turf algae. It's not really the case for macroalgae and coralline algae because people are usually getting the same names, the same definitions, I mean, for these two subgroups. But for turf algae, the definitions are sometimes quite different. The definition that we are using for the GCRMN, it's the height of the turf. When it's below 2 centimeters, we can consider that it's turf algae. But we know that depending on the taxonomic categories provided by the contributors, sometimes it's not fitting the definition that we are using. So the best way for us to move forward would be to try to provide the temporal trends of turf algae over time, and then to make you review these temporal trends and ask you if you think, based on what you have seen on the field, if you think it's something robust, or if there are some biases associated to, for example, changing in definition over time of different monitoring programs. So it's still something we have to work on in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both. And yes, data categorization and definitions can be complicated, especially when we're looking at such a high amount of data. I don't see any more questions in the chat for now, but I do appreciate we've got about 9 minutes left, so I do need to leave some time to very quickly wrap up. But for those of you that are monitoring the chat, I have posted the link to the interactive map in there. So please do head over to that and explore. But maybe if we don't have any more questions, maybe I can throw one at Jeremy and Britta, and I guess it's it's a question that always crops up that when we're having these discussions, and it's around about sort of why we only reporting sort of at the hard coral level, what coral cover level, why aren't we able to look at genus, for example, or life forms, when we're talking about functional roles and the roles that different reef species, etc., play on coral reefs? Why are we still at that sort of hard coral cover level? And maybe that might provide a bit of insight into the process and the challenges, should we say, around data collection.
I'll make a start, and then again Jeremy can chime in. So that is again the function that we are using data sets that are already available, and every coral monitoring program or project really has its own objectives, and so depending on those objectives, different indicators are usually selected, but also the resolution of these indicators is usually selected based on many different factors. And so what we are doing at a global scale is producing these very highly aggregated temporal trend analysis. And that means we actually need to have some commonality between all these data sets. So if, for example, half of the data sets collect really detailed species level information on corals, that's great. But if the other half actually only collects coral cover as an aggregated indicator, then we can't really combine the two. And so we are really driven by the limitations of the data and almost a lowest common denominator. How can we aggregate the best, most detailed information at a global scale? That is really our challenge. And so we will find, and Jeremy can comment on that, a lot of the data sets we capture them, or we would like to have them at the highest level of resolution, and then we can actually make these calls. What is possible to be aggregated at a finer scale? And we might be surprised that some programs actually collect much finer scale data or much finer resolution data, but we know from the 2020 exercise that this is not the case. So that's why in 2020 only 2 indicators were collected or were aggregated, coral cover and algae cover, because there just was not more resolution possible that made sense to aggregate it in this high-level analysis. But I'll let Jeremy comment on it, because he has already looked at the data sets that have come in to date and what level of resolution there is. But it is really, we are driven by the resolution of the available data sets.
Yes, thank you, Britta. Very clear reply. I just would like to add that the level of taxonomic resolution also greatly depends on the GCRMN region. For example, in the Caribbean, you have something like 70 species of hard corals, something like that. It's the order of magnitude. But for the Pacific and other region, you can have up to 500 of coral species. So it's very difficult for people who are going on the field to be able to go to the species level during a monitoring program where you are working, when you are working on coral reef of Indonesia, for example. Also because some species of hard corals are very similar in terms of shape, and it's not always possible to differentiate the species without molecular ecology, for example. So this taxonomic resolution greatly depends on the GCRMN region.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, maybe I suspect some people had that question but didn't really want to ask it. So hopefully we've answered some people's questions in the chat. Okay, excellent. That brings us to 5 minutes to go. So according to my agenda, it's time really for me to move on to wrapping up. But I will give one last chance if anybody wants to take the floor or ask a question in the chat. But we've covered quite a lot in this past 45 minutes or so. So I'll move to conclude everything. But if anybody does wish to use the chat function, then please do feel free. Excellent. So really, I've just got two slides to show you. Importantly, it's sort of how you can contribute your data. I think we've been talking about data, we've been asking your questions, but this is really the gives you a QR code or a URL to directly head over to the reports webpage where you can contribute your data. So if it isn't clear already, and if you do have data that you have not yet contributed, then please do reach out to myself and Jeremy. We're more than happy to establish a secondary call with you to discuss your data in more detail and work with you as well around sort of terms of use of your data. If you don't have data, your input is of course very much appreciated and very much valued. You can share the call for data, you can share the URL amongst your colleagues and friends and networks on your social media. But also you'll see in the top right hand corner that we've built a Trello board which has lots of resources on there available to you, from social media graphics to pre-written social media posts. So all you need to do is copy and paste. So we would really highly value your inputs, whether from the data perspective, from sharing the call for data, or of course further down the line when we come to the production and the writing of the report. And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. So just as a reminder, just to show you that timeline again, and we've discussed it a little bit and shown that there are some flexibility in these dates, especially around the sort of data collation. But I think, and Jeremy would agree with me here, that we would like the majority of data collated by the end of the year, because we need to move on to other tasks with respect to the report. So really, let's try and aim for the end of 2024. But again, do reach out to us, and as we sort of heard from Tito's question, if there are data still to come in, then please do make us aware of that. And don't feel like you need to send all your data in one go. We can accept data in slightly different batches as well. And then we're aiming to launch in 2026, and hopefully you can all join us on this journey. Hopefully the end result will be a positive one that will see that green upwards trend of coral reefs and their trends. And again, this is really a critical year for coral reefs, and I thank you all for your time, the hour and a half that you've taken out of your busy schedules. And Britta, I know it's late for you in Australia. And Francis, I'm going to pass over to you because I think you want to say something.
I'm very sorry, Tom, but just one last little point for me. Like, as you see on the screen, you've got two logos, like the government of Monaco and the government of Sweden. If you would like your logo to be on this slide in the future or in the cover of the book, we'll be accepting contribution. We have a budget. We always need more money, so I'm doing my job here. So feel free to reach out to us if you think you can sponsor the report. Sorry about that. Thank you, and thanks a lot for Tom, Jeremy, and Britta, and for all of you for attending. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. No, that's it's an incredibly valuable input to finish this off. If anybody's able to or would like to further support this process and fund the process, and please do, of course, reach out to us. So with all of that, I will stop sharing my screen. I will again thank you all for taking the time to join us for this webinar. I know many schedules are busy, and Britta will let you go to bed to rest up before our second webinar in approximately 8 hours, 9 hours or so. But again, thank you again, everybody. Thank you also for the technical team for providing the interpretation and technical support. But again, thank you everybody for your time, and please do reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ramona. I think we can end the call now. And Rosetta, everybody, interpreters, thank you very much for your interpretation as always. And I will see you shortly.